Hi everyone, I'm Lauren Concesau, the Deputy Executive Director of New South Wales at the Property Council of Australia. Thank you for joining us here today to discuss the results of the Procore and Property Council Building Compliance and Risk Survey and what this means for our industry. I'm joining you from the Property Council offices here in Sydney on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I'd like to take this opportunity to pay my respects to the elders, past, present, and their continuing connection to the land, waters and communities on which we work and reside. The format of today's session is that first we'll hear from Tom Karemacher, who's the Vice President APAC for Procore. Tom will share an analysis of the survey results, which have been compiled into a great resource for the industry. This report, the Data Differentiator Report, which a few of our panelist members have contributed to today, is the focus of our conversation. Following this, we'll have a panel we'll discuss some key elements and focus areas of the report, and we encourage you to participate by jumping in with your questions using the Q&A function on this event. Before I hand over to Tom to navigate this relationship and talk to us about the complexities between risk, quality and compliance in the built environment, I want to take a moment to thank Procore for partnering with us both on the survey and all other areas that they support the Property Council with. Procore are a partner who always go the extra mile and really support our advocacy work, as well as many events, putting us in connection with that industry. Their enduring commitment to the industry and to our members is very much noticed and appreciated. So thank you, Procore. Huge thank you to Tom and his team for partnering with us on this really important piece of research. The quality of data is crucial, so I'd like to recognise John Newen and our research team for gathering all the data and crunching the numbers. A big thank you to those of you who took the time out to fill in this survey. And finally, I'd like to acknowledge all of our expert panellists that are joining us here today, Nicole, Matt and Louise, for taking the time out to join us for today's session. Without further ado, I'll throw over to you, Tom.
Great, thanks Lauren. I'll just share my screen. There we go. Can everyone see that okay? Just confirm you can see the data differentiator, Lauren. Great. Well, Procore is extremely proud to partner with the Property Council of Australia on this research report. And it really came about through us asking, I guess it's just a number of questions. We knew there was a shift happening within the industry due to the unprecedented environment that we've just been through over the last couple of years. And what I'm referring to there is the shift from the commercial focus to e-commerce, industrial and logistical projects. We also saw building reform come through, and then asked the question around, well, what's the role that technology can play to better support the industry? And when we looked for data or benchmarks that was available for us to get some insights, that there wasn't a lot available to us. So it's for that reason that we decided to partner with the Property Council of Australia on this report to try and provide some insights, but more importantly, just a couple of benchmarks back to the industry as we come out of this 2-year period. So in terms of how the report came about, we had 166 respondents, largely from a pretty senior audience. So again, thank you to those who participated. And those respondents represented companies that were doing less than 100 million in turnover, right through to those that were doing $1 billion plus. So a pretty good range there. In terms of their representation of function or functions they represented, project operations management was the dominant function, and then property or asset management were the top 2 functions that were represented in this response. Across the nation, we saw response, which is fantastic. This is a national report, but it was dominated by the Eastern Seaboard, as we would expect. So in terms of the report and some of the findings, I'm going to provide a high-level overview today, but the report does go into quite a lot more detail. And the first finding was that there really is a spirit of optimism that came through in the response. And I think that really speaks to the industry's resilience and also flexibility in the amount of change that they've had to deal with over the last couple of years. But the major obstacles weren't surprising, actually quite consistent with greenfield scarcity, data availability representing 30% of the obstacles faced, and then time and budget pressures, which we would expect, but that was placing more pressure and risk around quality and defect management, tying into quality assurance and compliance. Naturally, there's also a backlog of projects that have occurred due to some of the shutdowns that we've experienced, and that is putting increased pressure on projects to be delivered on time. Now, we also knew there was a skills shortage before COVID hit. That continues to be the case today. And then there's also increased pressure coming from the residential side, with the market being so hot and obviously developers wanting to get product to market. So we are operating in a pretty dynamic environment. We then asked the question around the commitment to compliance and commitment to quality. Naturally, that we know there's been a huge focus in New South Wales on this, but we believe this is also a national priority for us. And this question that we asked was around the importance of compliance as it relates to being a competitive advantage. We thought this would be a layup question, and question was even worth putting in the survey. But interestingly, 82% felt it was an imperative, 11% desirable, and 7% somewhat important. So there's 18% there that would place a question mark against the importance of compliance. When we took these findings to a number of leaders across the nation, they were, I guess, shocked by this and unanimously felt that it should be imperative. In fact, it should be an area where all organisations are looking to outperform as it relates to quality. So we then went a layer deeper, and really the reason why we went to digital transformation is we felt that 18% that were either felt as desirable or somewhat important could be assisted through better baseline capability. And we felt that technology could actually play a bigger role to better support the industry here. And so asked the question around digital transformation and industry readiness. 53% said digital transformation was on their radar, and 20% said it was not. So again, there's a shift happening in the industry, and there's a realization that technology can play a much bigger role in supporting the change that's taking place. But I think it's a consideration rather than a strong call to action at this point in time. When we went into the activities with the greatest impact on project quality and risk management over the next 3 years, there was also some interesting findings here, with real-time portfolio view insights dominating the response, benchmarking against project costs, and then accurate feasibility analysis being the top 3. What we did observe was that BIM and digital twins were ranked lowest, where we know that that's a topical conversation, but we were surprised that it didn't rank higher in the response as it relates to quality and risk management over the next 3 years. The next question was really around, well, with this change that's happening and the dynamic environment that we're operating in and this unprecedented period we've been through, what is the regularity of software review? In this case, we did ask specifically around project management software. And again, we're a little bit surprised at the response, with 57% saying every 3 years, 22% saying every 5 years, and then 21% every 12 months. Again, the shift that's taking place, we would have thought there would have been increased regularity to look at how the environment's changed, and then more importantly, how technology can better support them as these shifts take place and these new trends occur. So there's probably a theme around a potential risk of laggards as we look to the future. We then drill into data, which is really around the value of data on commercial real estate projects. Again, in the spirit of quality and compliance, we saw that the identifying potential defects in advance and reducing risk of litigation were the dominant factors as it relates to data. And there's no doubt when we asked the commentary that there's a direct link to identifying defects early and preventing them leads directly to profitability. But there's also an additional benefit, and this was great to see, around measuring and minimizing the environmental impact of occupants, which it really has a sustainability benefit with reduction in waste, whilst we see better productivity and better profitability, we also see a positive impact on sustainability. And you could argue that the two are linked, and I know that may come up on the panel today. Then another benefit that we asked the audience was, the respondents, was really around what are the benefits as it relates to retaining skilled project staff, and really where should technology solutions be focused as it relates to retention. Interestingly, the overwhelming response was around eliminating or reducing the 101 boring, low value add tasks that could be automated or assisted through improved workflow, to just take that administrative work off people's plates, make their lives easier, help them get home earlier. There wasn't anything that in the way of a very dynamic or forward-looking response in terms of trying to get to that next era or visionary outcome as it relates to assisting people with digital capability. It's really addressing the 101, and I'd say that's consistent with what Procore has seen in the market, where we can make the greatest impact early. So there's just a few insights for you, and hopefully that will get the conversation started today. But of course, if you want to go into a greater level of detail, please take a look at the report, and we'd also welcome your feedback. But hopefully it's a helpful step in the right direction. I might pass back to you, Lauren.
Excellent, and thanks, Tom. That's a really insightful overview of those results, and there sure is a lot for us to unpick, and we'll probably just scratch the surface of that today. But before we get into the details, I just wanted to introduce the rest of our panelists joining Tom here with us today. So we have Louise Munger, who's the Vice President Digital Buildings for Schneider Electric, Matthew Press, Director of the Office of the Building Commissioner, Department of Customer Service here in New South Wales, and Nicole Sparks, General Manager Delivery and Operations for Fraser Property Australia. So thank you all for taking your time out of your morning to have this conversation with us and with our members. And to those on the call, don't forget to send in your questions. But let's get started with some questions on the report and the findings. So Tom, we've talked today about digital capability of organisations. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about how Australia is adopting technology compared to the rest of the world.
Yes, so Lauren, it's a great question, and I'd say Australia is actually leading the adoption of technology in certain areas. So as it relates to quality and safety, I think Australia has set some of the best benchmarks globally, and certainly from a Procore's perspective, a lot of our R&D investment as it relates to how we serve the global market in terms of quality and safety capability has been centered around what is Australia doing and meeting the Australian standards. So in that regard, I think we're a leader. In terms of where we're behind, our supply chain, as we know, is quite fragmented. And so when it comes to managing data across that supply chain, and it actually came up in a recent discussion, it's a real challenge. There's a question around who owns the data, how do we get a comprehensive view of the entire supply chain as it relates to a specific project, and often it's siloed or it's lost, restricted. And I think that's a real challenge, and it's probably an opportunity for the industry to think about how can we increase the level of openness to encourage better stakeholder collaboration and get better data visibility of the supply chain.
Excellent, thanks, thanks, Tom. And that probably leads quite nicely into a question I have here for you, Matt. Can you give us some insights into some of the research undertaken by the Office of the Building Commissioner into digital capability?
Yeah, look, I'm probably going to be the typical cranky regulator on this one and be slightly more less optimistic, because I think the research that we did is quite complementary to Procore's, and what it highlights is that there's definitely opportunity, great opportunity through digital technology, but it's just not aligned to the industry particularly well. The research highlighted that at least in New South Wales, we've got a bulk of the industry, over 80%, that's less than 20 employees. Around a third, or sorry, 50% are actually 0 to 4, so quite micro businesses. So their capability and value proposition in digital is quite different to a significant sort of tier 1 player. And the research showed that, look, in New South Wales at least, over 3/4 of builders and designers are still using 2D CAD systems and actually submitting designs as PDF versions of CAD. And I think that's just reflective of where they are in their digital maturity today. So, you know, we can see the benefits of being more digital. We've got to think about making them relevant to the actual players themselves.
Excellent, and we'll delve more into that shortly. But while we're on the topic of digital capability, Louise, can you give us your thoughts on what organisations need to be thinking about when it comes to the ownership of data and the standardisation of data across the industry?
Yeah. So, look, thinking about real estate, I think real estate generally as a sector has made great leaps and bounds in the last decade in technology and digitisation, particularly in the operations and management of real estate portfolios and the customer experience. But what we know about construction is that it is one of the least digitised industries globally. In a McKinsey report, I think it was only ahead of agriculture and hunting as an industry. So there's a lot of room for improvement. So we think about, what does that mean? What should organisations be thinking about when it comes to ownership of that data, and particularly in the construction phase, the design and build phase of buildings? So thinking about the survey results. So we know that BIM and digital twin ranked quite lowly in the priorities for the respondents. Yet in terms of the value that people are looking for is being able to anticipate potential defects, which obviously digital twin and BIM both give that opportunity. So that tells me that some of these concepts are quite poorly understood in the industry at large. And there's a real opportunity for organisations to say, how can I own that part of the data? How can I standardise those inputs of data that might be from construction and project management? And what might I use those to operationalise that data into a digital twin? So if organisations aren't thinking about that data from the very first concept, from design and construction, then we're really missing out on an opportunity when it comes to the operation and maintenance of portfolios.
Really useful contribution. Thanks, Louise. And Nicole, while we've got you on the line, in your experience, what digital tools are vital for to the project's quality and the risk management, both now and potentially over the coming years?
Yeah, good question, Lauren. Digital compliance tools, look, they're here to stay. I think they will continue to assist with inspection and testing. However, look, as we continue to strive towards compliance and best practice, we will see the emergence of tools that focus on FMEA, or failure modes and effect analysis. So we'll proactively evaluate design and building process to identify where and how we might fail, and then assess the relative impacts of those failures to essentially remove the opportunity for defects and works to occur. You know, I think that those types of tools are here now, and they're only going to get better over the next few years.
Great. Yeah, look, we all know that technology is certainly here to stay. So I think that's some really interesting insights there. And then just an open question, feel free to jump in. To the panelists, like, what role does data play in the development process, and what does best practice look like in your view?
Yeah, I'll jump in, Lauren. And funnily enough, Tom and I were just talking about this the other day, and saying that, I think we've got the foundations right in using data in terms of having dashboards and a clear view of what's happening in the here and now. And I think the extension of that is to make sure that we can use it to evaluate projects after the fact. And so we go back and use the dashboards to say, well, where did the defects arise? What was the root cause? And let's learn from that experience to do better and improve next time.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, Lauren, I'd layer on that. I think Matt's spot on with that commentary. For a long time, the industry has focused on data capture, and that has been an obstacle. And I think that's an ongoing focus area. But more importantly, there's also the risk of being overwhelmed by data. And I think the industry really needs to think about the objectives and the outputs, which is really what Matt's getting at there in terms of what are we trying to report on, what are we trying to achieve through the data capture. So we're not burdening the end users, but rather getting the output that's needed, and it's a good use of their time in terms of the input that's required.
I agree, Tom. I think that it's good that we've got data analysis and we're capturing data, but being able to use it proactively to help benefit, the products that we're delivering our customers is where the real value lies. And there's definitely a trend where, people go, oh, I've got a data tool, so therefore I'm compliant. And unfortunately, by having a system to inspect something and check that you're doing something is not necessarily the skill to actually deliver a quality product. It's just a method of ticking a box to say that you've done something. So I think that the evolution of our digital tools will help us to not only deliver quality products, but ensure that we're delivering it to a standard that is compliant.
And replicating, I think that's the important part, not just once, we do it again and again and again and continue to build and refine as we go.
Yeah, I'd agree. 4 from 4 there. I think best practice would start with commonly aligned outcomes. So all stakeholders working towards the same ambition, and would reiterate Matt's comment around standardisation. So in an industry that's very fragmented and no two projects are the same, trying to standardise some of those processes along the way to drive efficiency at all levels of the supply chain would be a great starting point.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone. And Louise, it's a great segue into our next set of questions. So we're going to have a bit of a chat now at the more tangible implementation tools and barriers to bringing this to life. So, Matt, while large businesses have the capacity for sophisticated systems and processes, what can we do as an industry to help the smaller players reach those similar standards and systems?
Yeah, I think some of the things that came through the research was around ease of use, particularly recognising that don't have the sort of the corporate wraparound services to do training or ongoing investment in the tools. So as much as digital and software providers can do to provide that service to the entity so they know how to use it and they've got ongoing support so they can actually get the measurable benefit that it's intended to provide. Thinking about the cost structure, again, having a cost structure that's relevant to that small business space, thinking about monthly fees rather than sort of large upfront costs. Also thinking about interconnectivity. There's lots of different systems around, and I think there's a bit of a hesitancy in the industry to get sort of locked into one, then you can't sort of easily change if you need to. So, having a system that sort of responds to that as well. And lastly, I think being able to demonstrate the benefits to the industry, having clear data on the productivity gains, the time saved, the cost avoided through the product as well, because they're looking for that clarity if they're going to invest.
So clear data on data. I've got it. Crystal clear. Very, very good and good list there, Matt. Thank you for that. Louise, just wanted to check in with you about whether there's a way that procurement processes can support the implementation of digital tools throughout the industry and what your thoughts are there.
Yes, definitely. I think maybe like to consider some of the barriers around digitisation in construction. Firstly, we know it's a highly fragmented industry with lots of pieces of the supply chain, and Matt's given some great statistics around the size of organisations in that supply chain. We also know that there's a lack of replication in the projects. So, no two buildings are the same, no two projects are the same, or very rarely. So every time you're doing something, it is a complete new set of designs. So real lack of replication there. It can be very transient, so people move from project to project. They also move from company to company, new organisations, new people, meaning that every project you've got a new set of people that need to be trained on whatever processes and systems are there. And finally, construction's very decentralised, so it's quite regional in its approach to management. There's a lot of regional players that only play in one state. Yes, there's the big national and even global players, but there is a lot of decentralisation. So all of those things combine, you know, to make some of the barriers in terms of getting this done effectively. I think from a procurement sense, my question would be to the industry is the digitisation layer of a construction project, so whether that's BIM, digital twin, project management software, at what level of that supply chain are those systems being procured? And is the end user, so is the owner of the asset ultimately the one that is setting the standard of what that data, what the inputs are, and importantly, what those outcomes are? So if we take that approach and we know that the end users, be it government, if it's a healthcare or transport infrastructure project, or a real estate company in the case of office and logistics assets, are they actually setting the standard and then, you know, driving that change through the whole of the supply chain? Or is that being left to the builder to drive, you know, in an attempt to drive efficiency and be more effective in that project? But then we are getting that no two, you know, projects are potentially the same. So is there an opportunity actually to elevate this conversation to the end user and to the owners and long-term managers of assets, so that we start to drive standardisation and more clarity in decision making along the way?
Thanks, Louise. Really great. Tom, can you tell us what you think maybe is the biggest obstacle to overcome to help the industry embrace digital technology and meet the quality and compliance objectives? And more specifically, is it a technical obstacle or is it a mindset obstacle?
Yes, so it's a pretty big question. I'm not sure I can nail it down to one obstacle, but I will say that I don't think the industry has a lack of appetite for technology, but it is upon the technology vendors to meet the needs of the industry. And I will say that I think we're making a lot of progress in this regard, where I think technology vendors are partnering much more closely with the industry to understand exactly what they need as it relates to new legislation. Certainly what we've seen in New South Wales, where technology vendors are really catering for those specific needs to make data capture easy, but also to ensure the output is of a high level of quality that actually ensures compliance. And so we're not just getting data for data's sake. So I'd say that's part one, where the technology vendors play a big role. Number two is there's a big change management exercise to go through. People are already overloaded. People's lives are extremely busy. There's already a lot of administration day to day. So adding more to people's plates, we've got to be really careful on how we're doing that, and they need to understand the why. And I think if we're clear on what the output is that we're looking for, then it's a better justification. But that change management exercise that I think Louise was referring to as well is super important. And that sponsorship really needs to come from the top as we roll out new technology to meet industry standards and requirements.
Thanks, Tom. And I think, you know, from the engagement of this survey and more broadly conversations, you're right, there's a real interest in data technology and systems to simplify things, but also potentially a level of overwhelm about the variety and the options and the amount of data and how to focus and target that. I want to throw over to you, Nicole, to talk about some of the risks that developers are facing and the sorts of actions that they might be taking to mitigate those.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. Look, a surprising benefit from COVID is the increased demand for product, particularly in housing. So this obviously drives demand for skills, labour, materials. So it's fundamental that we ensure that our delivery partners are aligned to our ethos and deliver exceptional products and quality. So one of the biggest risks to be mitigated in our industry is ensuring that we, you know, expand systems like the iCert systems that's being rolled out in New South Wales. So if we're able to roll out similar systems or make that system become more accessible nationally and get our supply chain on board with that, we would see that quality and financial risks are mitigated. So I think we've seen our tier ones volunteer to participate and be part of these programs in New South Wales. So for those who aren't familiar with that system, it's essentially a star rating tool on quality and finances. And it's, if this is rolled out nationally, I think it's, it's going to be another opportunity to mitigate risks in our industry. And, I think, the developers and the builders will drive this, this initiative that was started by the New South Wales government.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think New South Wales is certainly doing quite a lot in this space, and I'm sure Matt would agree with that one. And I think the reports told us that as well. Tom, I just wanted to check in with you. We have an overwhelming amount of legislation that's being discussed and hitting industry at the moment. I'm wondering if you have any insights or thoughts on how the industry might be able to standardise our systems and processes to be able to stay on top of those legislative changes. Anything that you've got insight into around best practice benchmarks, and how you know whether as an industry participant, are you doing a good job?
Yeah, so I think the industry knows how to benchmark, and as we saw from the report, there's a real thirst for benchmarking data, which again, I think technology providers can provide through anonymized data. There's a lot of data being captured that can provide really valuable benchmarks back to the industry. But within the organisation itself, there has to be a focus on what type of data you're trying to capture, and then ensure that that output is providing the right level of visibility to ensure compliance. And that's what Matt was saying at the start, that if you can hit that point where you're getting compliance in, say, project number 1, you can start to replicate it and you can start to standardise your processes, but more importantly, also identify the trends that are occurring where there may be increased defects as it relates to a specific contractor that then organisations can address on that next project, which starts to move us into a more proactive and predictive environment versus reacting project to project, and we're not really taking away the key learnings. But it does start with a clear definition of the data that needs to be captured to ensure that the visibility is there at the end.
I think the health and safety industry took the lead on that, Tom. They really helped to move the industry away from being reactive and proactive. So that was that's a really that's been an essential tool for companies to mature in their journey a lot, away from what was losing time as opposed to what opportunities we have to learn from these experiences. So I think that all across our industry we're looking at how we can improve and what opportunities we have to learn from design failures or defects, or how we do it differently, not only because of the cost that for our customers, but then also the cost to businesses, the cost to subcontractors, the cost because there's contractors who are no longer around anymore because they just don't exist. That we're no longer an industry that is reactive. We are becoming more proactive. So the data is helping us to deliver that, and certainly the systems that for instance Procore are delivering to us to help us meet those demands and achieve those targets. It's really helping.
Yeah, thanks Nicole. I wanted to check in relation to sustainability, waste and rework, and how these data systems apply to these concepts of productivity. Louise, we might start with you if you're able to give us some insights into your awareness on sustainability data and software and how the industry might be able to utilise that for better reporting.
And I think real estate as a sector has done amazingly over the last decade and more on sustainability reporting, particularly scope 1 and 2 emissions, and the integration of many sets of operational data over that time. And I'm sure if there's any sustainability professionals listening into this, they have seen the full evolution of reporting to neighbours and GREBs and other environmental rating schemes, and the volume of data that has had to be integrated and captured as part of those reporting over time. And we've become very good very, very good at that. I think as we start to see more and more organisations reporting on their Scope 3 emissions and looking beyond what's in their direct control, having that data and being able to track and capture the total carbon footprint of all of your projects, right from design through to construction, and everything else is going to be really critical. There's a huge opportunity to drive sustainability and efficiency through the construction space. We know that 10% of human generated CO2 is from concrete and building materials. 10% of construction materials go to waste, and 30% of construction activity is rework. So through digitising the projects and the construction, having project simulation, we can actually have less concrete, less rework, less waste, and save all of those emissions. Not only that, we then have the data to report. So huge opportunity, again, if organisations can standardise those processes, stipulate what system they want, be very clear about the outcome that they're seeking in terms of the data that they need for sustainability reporting. They're on their way to really being able to streamline their reporting for those Scope 3 emissions and future carbon targets.
Excellent. Thanks, Louise. And I think the property industry really is a leader in many, many ways around environmental and sustainability. And it sounds like, you know, we're a long way down this track, but always, as always, more to be done. Just a reminder to those listening in, if you've got any of your own questions, please feel free to chuck them into the Q&A section on here. But while we're talking about productivity, waste and rework, Matt, I know the work of the Building Commissioner has been very focused on this of late. Can you tell us what are the opportunities that you're seeing in this space?
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. It is something we're very passionate about, and I think Louise has hit the nail on the head a few times there. So our discussion with waste is that it's about getting zero waste. It's about designing waste out of our construction process all the way back at the design phase, which is exactly what Louise is saying. And we're finding that's quite a confronting discussion for many in the industry. They feel that the job's done because there's waste in the skip bin, and then their waste contractor is no doubt doing some recycling, so we're all happy. But waste in our industry is a significant issue. There's something like 4,000 skip bins a day that we generate. And those skip bins, I think that's a real measure of actually lost productivity because we've over procured, over designed, had to do rework, all of those sorts of things. So the game changer here for our industry is actually getting to zero waste because we've had better planning and better execution. And that's the focus of a learning module we're producing with the University of Wollongong. We're trying to pick up on best practice techniques, some narratives from some developers of all shapes and sizes that have invested heavily in this over the last few years. Westbourne, for example, they had a 3 to 5 year waste reduction program that saved them somewhere in the region of $5,000 per apartment. That's labour cost and material costs coming together. So the dividends can be significant, and I think we've got to get the industry to understand waste is not just a sustainability and environmental problem, it's actually a real economic and productivity issue that we've got to solve.
Certainly is, and again, plenty more to do there, but the rework piece is certainly something that we can see as a great opportunity to revise how we're doing things. Nicole, speaking of revising, how do you see that developers are responding to changing building requirements and market preferences?
I was trying to think of this from a sustainability point of view when you initially threw this one at me earlier, Lauren, and I guess as someone who is supposed to look after sustainability for our company, I feel like I run around town with my oil plates on because it is quite confronting, not just in the waste management space, Matt, but just on every front, from understanding our carbon footprint to understanding the requirements we've got to do for our leasing, then our waste management, and then looking forward into how we channel all this into biodiversity. You know, I think, as we know, Australia, probably compared to our European counterparts, have been pretty slow to respond to committing to our net zero initiatives, and, you know, collecting data to understand how our footprint impacts our developments is currently our #1 priority. The reality is there are just so many data components. I've been working in construction for over 20 years now, and when we look at how we track sustainability, there are so many different data collection and modelling. It is you almost need a degree to understand each different, you know, component of it. So the reality is, though, that our customers expect this, whether they're buying a home, they're operating a retail centre, they're leasing or buying an asset from us. You know, it's something that we have to do. It's a no-brainer. It's the right thing to do. And there's obviously minimum standards that we must all comply with. So, you know, the changing builder requirements are actually probably moving a little bit too slow. If we look at the targets that we've ambitiously set, you know, and ours are 2028. So, you know, I think that, you know, industry is going to drive some of those changes, certainly driving outcomes from a supply perspective, and then driving how we respond to meeting, you know, these targets. But it's, you know, it is, I'm going to be honest with you, it is so confronting, and every day you're learning something new and going, oh, how are we going to do this? But it goes back to those principles of 101 of what we do, what is the problem that we're trying to solve, and how's the best way to solve that. And unfortunately, that often means that you actually have to put costs in to do that up front, because if you don't put the costs in up front, you're not going to be able to deliver something that is affordable, and you're generally going to have your hand in your pocket at the end of the day if you don't do it properly in the first instance.
Yeah, look, I think all of us have probably felt that overwhelm when looking at sustainability and the breadth of impact in the building, construction, and property industry. So you're not alone there, Nicole, and we're all on a journey together to look at how we can do it better. Tom, is Procore working on new tools or solutions to help contractors and developers report on specific types of rework or defects that we're seeing across the industry? Is there anything happening in that space that you would like to share?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that I think technology vendors as a whole are doing a better job of partnering with the industry to solve for their needs. And Procore has certainly taken aim in that regard. And as it relates to the recent acts that were passed, we work very closely with industry on understanding exactly what insights they need for the DBP Act. So a lot of the conversation today has been around what's the data output you're looking for to ensure compliance. And I think technology vendors can play a role there to help with that and help guide it. And I think in this case, Procore's done a pretty good job of providing a DBP Act insights report, which clearly looks at the 5 elements of the Act, and then the inspection pass rate, and then obviously inspections and observations completed as it relates to those 5 elements. But more importantly, what it's giving is visibility post-project as to, well, what were the serious defects or potential defects that occurred as it relates to the specific contractor. So there's the ability to filter and really go down to a level of detail to get the key learnings to do better next time, but also have a level of confidence that you've got a compliant view for how you can operate in the future. So we're proud of that personally, and we've got a lot of great feedback from the industry, but I think that's just one example. And it's, again, I think technology vendors can play a bigger role in helping define what the data output should be by working closely with the industry and the regulators.
Excellent. And we've had a question from the audience here as well.
Well, Lauren, could I just recognise?
Sorry, yep.
Yeah, I'd just like to recognise that as a regulator, I think Procore really have, you know, taken the time to understand the reforms and think about how they can embed them in their product, you know, and that's not something that everyone does. You know, there's a lot of software providers that come to us and say, look, if only people used our product, it'd solve the world's problems tomorrow. So you just need to mandate that. I say, sorry, that's not where we're about, but I really have to recognise Procore for understanding the DPB, understanding the RAB Act, and trying to produce a product which actually looks at people's responsibilities through that new legislative lens.
Always a good partner Procore. Thanks for being part of the conversation and the solutions. So the audience question that we have at the moment is about the actual details of the survey. So Tom, jump in if you've got some insight here, but wanting to know what's the profile of the 20% of respondents that aren't thinking about digitisation versus the profile of the 53% that are. And we've talked a lot about the large players having the capabilities now and how we bring the smaller ones on the journey. But just curious as to into the here and now, any insights you have around those respondents.
That's a great question. Unfortunately, I don't have the data that breaks that down in terms of the demographic, if you like. But it's something that I'm sure we could look at and come back to the individual that asked that question, because I think it's that next level of detail down that would be interesting to understand.
Excellent, wonderful. And another audience question from Alan Chambers. So Alan says that we've seen healthcare get bogged down with reporting and KPIs, and the data is useless on its own. It's what you do with it that adds the value. So the question is, are we seeing better uses of data and technology deployments across the board? Because it still appears that it's not being introduced to the design and procurement processes early enough to get the best outcome.
I can answer that, Lauren. I think from our perspective at Fraser's Property, we had, we rolled out a program, which I know a number of our peers also have similar programs when they're building, to digitise their inspection and test planning. And it essentially sometimes becomes a tick and flick exercise, and it doesn't matter whether it's a paper document or it's a digital document. But what we found was that if we then sat with our teams and understood why it was becoming a tick and flick, and what we could remove and what we could make easier, what was essential, and then the more that we had those conversations around what value we were getting out of it, it actually led to a discussion on how we could better design or deliver, and what we could do to make something simpler that ensured a better outcome for our customers. So, the real value that you get out of data is the conversations that you get to have. You can have the best system in the world, but if you're actually not, asking how that system is functioning, if you're not, challenging how that is, if you're not connecting that to what you're designing and what you're doing and connecting the conversation to really collaborate in that space, then, it will always just remain a digital tool.
Yeah, absolutely, Nicole. And conversation and engagement, as we know, is really critical in every piece of work that we do. And this is no different, really. Is there anyone else on the panel that wanted to add to that at this point? Matt?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, Lauren, because data is only useful if it's used and applied. And we've really spent the last 9 months as a regulator supercharging our digital and data capabilities. We've almost got to catch up and make sure that it's now being embedded across all types of decision making. So for us, we've started with audits and having a very targeted approach to which players and projects we inspect. Now we're going to take that back through the entire regulatory framework and, for example, apply it when we assess a license right at the start. So not just reviewing it on the paper, but going back to a risk-based model, which tells us whether we should even review that application at all, or how much time we should spend on it based on its risk profile. So I think it's a very valid point. It's about how you apply the data, and I think that part takes time to get the maximum value.
Yeah, it's very much about getting the systems right in the capturing useful data, and then having accessibility to that to be able to solve your problems, right? I know I was rushing back to the office to be able to jump on today, and Google Maps could tell me when the street was busy and which exactly, take into account traffic in order to do that. Unfortunately, it couldn't tell me that the car park next to the office was full and I had to go and find another park. But, always useful. And as the technology evolves, it gives us a great opportunity to to do things differently and better and in real time. I want to just jump back to the specifics of the survey and the research that we've done here today, and just go around the screen, I guess, in this digital sense, and just get something from each of you around a real key takeaway from the research, and what could industry who are listening into this session today, what could they take away from it and really put into action in the near term to leverage what we've put together here. So I might start with you, Louise.
Okay, so for me, the takeaway is digitisation of the construction industry is coming, and it's coming in a big way. So really, I would say every organisation should be thinking about the role that they play in that, where they sit in that procurement cycle and how much they want to be in the driving seat of the strategy of that. I think to Alan's comment about it, is it being done early enough? I think the answer is no. Why is that? Because the value is not properly understood yet. So I think we're really going to see a shift, and sessions like today are great, in the industry at large, acknowledging the value that can be driven from digitisation of construction and project and design processes, the efficiencies that can be saved. And I think the takeaway everyone should be thinking about, what is the role that my organisation plays in this? What do I want from that data? And am I being involved at the right level to get those outcomes?
Thanks, Louise. Matt, your takeaway and advice.
Yeah, I think my takeaway, Lauren, is that definitely digital is here and now, and it's going to be the future as well. But let's not lose sight of the challenges of operating in the digital world, what we've got to do to train and skill our staff, and reflect on the value that our networks have, organisations like the Property Council, so we can coach and mentor each other through the challenges and really learn and adopt best of breed, particularly when we think about translating what a tier one operator might do, and trying to bring as much of that down to the grassroots of our industry as well, so we can all go forward together.
Excellent, thanks, Matt. Nicole, your takeaway.
Yeah, I'm going to steal an insight from Selena Short in the report, where she says that the best time to start work on digital transformation was yesterday, but the next best time is now. I think a key takeaway is that don't be alarmed or intimidated. The digital revolution is here to stay, and these tools are here to assist us, and they will ensure that we get better quality outcomes that will really underpin the foundations of our industry. So, I think that every business has an opportunity to partner with someone that can assist them, and it doesn't matter where you are on your journey. There is so much out there. Start by having conversations. If you're starting from zero, then the best thing that you can do is pick up the phone, send an email, get on the web, because there is so many providers regardless of what part of the industry you're in.
Absolutely. Some good advice there, Nicole. And I think, from my perspective, the best part about a digital solution is that you can adapt it and grow it with you as you go. So no longer are we printing 10,000 copies of our response or our solution, but we can mold and adapt with key partners as we go and as we grow, and individualize and cater to our needs. So absolutely get started. Go fast, go early, and adapt and grow along the way as we learn. Tom, your key insights and takeaway from the research.
Yeah, I think I agree with all the commentary, and I think there's just a fantastic opportunity to define clearly what is the output that an organisation is looking for, and be really clear on what data you need access to, and also ask the question around data ownership. Who should own that data, and then back to the point on the fragmented model that we operate in. How can we just maybe challenge the audience here in the industry, is how can we operate for greater level of openness and collaboration to make access to that data easier to get the outputs that you're looking for.
I just want to drill down into that a little bit more if I can. If I'm looking at a digital solution and I'm someone in the building construction property industry, what sort of questions specifically or risks should I be thinking about in that data ownership space? Is there any key pieces of advice or hacks to data ownership that that the members should be aware of or thinking about?
There's a couple of elements. I mean, the first one is what's the contractual relationship with the technology vendor. So if you decide to leave that technology solution, do you have to pay to get your data back? Will you get an automatic export? Who owns the data at all times during the contract? That's I think that's a starting point. Which I would hope that in this day and age, the data is the customer's data at all times, not the technology vendors, and in no way should the customer be charged to get their data back. That should be the baseline capability. And then part two of that is really whether you're an owner or a contractor, who owns the data from that project, where does it sit, and there may be multiple technology solutions involved in delivering that project, but I think there needs to be a level of clarity at the start of the project as to who is the owner of the data and where does that reside, and then what's the handover process at the end of the project as well.
Really useful advice there, Tom, and good points to for someone that wanted to walk away from today and get started. So if there's no more questions from the audience, I think we'll come into the end of today's session on time and making sure we're giving you back some time in your day to be able to get to the next meeting. So I just want to take a moment to say thank you to all of our panelists today. Thank you, Tom, for your wonderful presentation and for participating, and to Nicole, Louise and Matt, who've given us some really valuable insight into where we're at in this current data and digitization journey, what the opportunities are, and how to get started if we're not in that space already, and really how to focus our energies and not get drowned by the conversations and the opportunities that are out there. So I hope that you've all enjoyed today's discussion, and just take a special moment to thank Procore for again partnering with us in this really important conversation. So if you haven't yet read the full report, it is available for download, and you can access it under the About tab on the Property Council research element of our website, or directly from Procore's website themselves. So thank you again for joining us in this conversation, and enjoy the rest of your day.